I'm going to talk to you about three things today. First, education primarily happens outside the walls of a school. Second, if the first proposition is true, then education happens with those seemingly mundane events that happen all around us. And third, if the previous two propositions are true, then the way we should live our lives is by being aware. I'm an English teacher, so naturally I'm going to start with a piece of literature to help us think about this. In 1893, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle penned his Sherlock Holmes story, The Final Problem. In that story, Sherlock Holmes dies. He's locked in mortal conflict with his arch nemesis, Dr. Moriarty, and they both perish when they fall over the falls at Reichenbach, which is a real place, by the way. You can go visit it. Haven't been there, but it's one of my maybe spring break trip or something like that sometime. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle meant for his detective to die. He wanted to kill him because he wanted to write what he called proper literature. Now, can anyone tell me anything other than Sherlock Holmes Sir Arthur Conan Doyle ever wrote? Of course you can't, because no one can, because lucky for us, those books were terrible. And they made no money. It's a money thing. They made no money. So in 1901, he penned The Hound of the Baskervilles, which is by far the most popular Sherlock Holmes story. In it, he resurrected his title character, and for us, we got a nice, succinct statement about Sherlock Holmes' detective method. It's up there behind me. Observation. Observation is how Sherlock Holmes solves his crimes. The late American novelist David Foster Wallace, in his remarkable commencement address, This is Water, which you should go watch, by the way, it's free on YouTube, said, "The real value of education has almost nothing to do with knowledge and everything to do with simple awareness. Awareness of things that are real and essential, so hidden in plain sight, all around us, all the time." You see, I think David Foster Wallace is right. I think education, real education, is not about the things that we do in the classroom, but rather how we take those things in the classroom and our perspective and apply it to the things we see in the real world. But let's run some numbers. So according to the U.S. Center for Public Education, a student is going to have about 900 to 1,000 instructional hours per year. That's a lot of time, by the way. 900 to 1,000 hours. So that means after 13 years of education, a student is going to have about 11,700 to 13,000 hours of instructional time. Now, if we were to put that in a little bit more understandable numbers, that means 487.5 days of straight 24-hour education. Think about that, teachers in the room. That would not be very much fun for anyone. That means straight, no sleep, no food, no bathroom, straight education, which of course is impossible. So how about we make it a little easier? So if we were to make it an 8-hour day, of course that means 8 hours, nonstop, no lunch, no breaks, nothing. That means 1,462 8-hour days. So roughly 4 years of education. For the tuition rate, if you only pay 4 years of tuition to get them through all the way through, that'd actually be quite a bargain. It'd be painful for all of us, but it'd be a bargain. But of course, that's just completely impossible. But that's still a lot of time. That's a lot of time for education. But maybe not. An average person, if we were to say anybody's born from the time that they're born till they're 18 when they graduate, if they graduate when they're 18, is going to be alive 157,680 hours. It's a long life. Of course, that doesn't take into account the first 4 years of it. It does take into account the first 4 years, which we need to subtract, because mostly you're doing, let's say, social basic skills. Of course, you do learn stuff, like my son, who's recently learned to say no to everything. He's a year and a half. That's a lot of fun, by the way. That puts it around 113,000 hours if we subtract those 4 years. But 113,000 hours needs a bit of an adjustment, because we have to take into account things like sleep. So let's say 8 hours of sleep. Let's say an hour and a half of eating, and 30 minutes of getting ready, showering, and bathroom per day. Now, and realize that's quite a conservative number, so maybe I should do a TED Talk on the efficiency of 30 minutes of getting ready and going to the bathroom each day. But that'll have to wait for another time. But that puts us about 113,000 hours minus 47,000 hours for all those times. That puts us at 66,430 waking hours. Now, if we take that first number, 11,700, the low number, and with a little bit of long division, see, don't tell you English teachers can't do math, that gives us 18%. 18% of our life is spent in schools. And that's a very conservative number. So 18% of our life spent inside the schools learning. Of course, that means that 82% of our life is spent outside the walls of the school. So that means the majority of our life is spent engaging in other parts, other things. First, education, real education, has to happen outside the walls of the classroom. Numbers don't lie. That leads me to the second proposition. If education happens outside the walls of our classroom, then it has to be the things around us where we learn. So there's a field of study known as semiotics. It's a field of linguistic studies that looks at nonverbal communication. It's not communication between humans where we talk about, a look. What does a look mean? Well, you tell you're mad. That's a field known as prosody. Semiotics is non-human, nonverbal communication. It deals with looking at signs and symbols in our world and their meanings and interpretation. So let me unpack that a little bit. One subcategory of semiotics is the study of icons. That's a Greek word for images. So if we took an example of an icon in our world today, this is the universal symbol for male and female in the bathroom. I'm about to give you something to think about next time you go to the bathroom. If you look at this sign, no person needs to be told, hey, that's what it means. No one's going to mistakenly go into the other gender's bathroom and be like, oh, I didn't know what that sign meant. I was confused. We pretty much know what it means. Of course, we're told and taught that. But behind this is something interesting. Semiotics takes a look at this image and thinks about what this says about male and femaleness. So when we look at this, we think, oh, what does that say about what it means to be a woman? Or what does that say about what a man or a male looks like? And why are these symbols even there anyways? Have you ever seen a person that actually looks like that? It would freak me out if I saw somebody walking down the street that looked like that. But of course not. Of course not. So what does it say about who we are, who you are? And that's what semiotics works with. At the center of semiotics is the concept of the metaphor. So that would be considered a metaphor, a semiotics metaphor. Most people are familiar with literary metaphors. Literary metaphors take a thing signified and they use a signifier to talk about it. So for example, that steak is as big as a car. I'm from Texas where the steaks are as big as cars, so it's literal. But in this case, most steaks are not as big as a car. But what I'm saying is that steak is really, really big, right? You're not really confused with what I'm trying to communicate and express with the metaphor. Unlike the literary metaphor, a semiotics metaphor says something. It's a phrase of connotation that expresses something about something without saying something. Okay? Did you get that? That's a little confusing, I get. So let me think about this, and let me help you think about this a little bit easier. A literary metaphor requires no interpretation. The steak is as big as a car means it's really big. I think most people would get that. So let's say little to no interpretation. Whereas a semiotics metaphor requires complete interpretation. So when we look at the sign of the male-female, we have to think about it's not communicating something that's obvious to us about male or femaleness. We have to think about it. So what's the characteristic of the semiotics metaphor? One, it's visual. It's not spoken. So the literary metaphor is spoken or written. The steak is as big as a car, really big. The semiotics metaphor is just an image that's meant for you to think about what it is. The semiotics metaphor, because it's visual, also implies transference, the ability to reflect our thinking off of a thing back to us to help us think more about our own lives. It requires active engagement. And the reason this is important, and the reason semiotics is a nice tool to help us think about looking at things in our world, is because it deals with meaning. How we think and gain meaning about our lives, about who we are, about how we live our lives, about what it means to be human, about what it means to be anything. It's meaning culled from visual things all around us. So it's being aware. It's not just seeing a male or female bathroom sign, but seen as an opportunity to think about the central core concept of gender, of what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a woman in the culture we're from, lots and lots of things. The semiotics metaphor gives us an opportunity to interpret and think and reflect in very deep and profound ways about some of the most seemingly mundane things around us. All right. So semiotics is useful first because it's really cool. I happen to think it's really interesting. But second, it lets us know that we can find meaning, value in almost anything. So I want to show you kind of how this works. And I'm going to turn to something that I happen to like a lot, and that is zombies. All right, I love zombies. I always have loved zombies. In fact, the first movie I ever watched was when I snuck down when my teenage 8-year-old sister's 8 years older than me was watching a zombie movie, sneaking down and hiding behind the couch and watching it as a 5-year-old, and to my horrified mother's response. But ever since then, I've loved zombies. And people love zombies. In fact, since 1980, there have been 69 zombie movies with theatrical distribution that have made about $1.3 billion. And if you take into account non-theatrical distributed movies, zombie movies, so things on like Netflix, VHS, that dates me, by the way, VHS, DVDs, it's even more. Those kind of media have been very kind to the zombie movies. If you don't believe me, go onto your Netflix tonight and type in zombies, and you'll see just a gazillion zombie movies pop up. Zombie pets, zombie scouts, zombie teachers, zombie kids. It's tons of them, right? Tons and tons of them. But along with movies, we can see it in television. In fact, one of the most popular TV shows in the United States is The Walking Dead, which has about 11 million people tuning in every week to watch this thing, and it's currently in its 9th year. It has been a tremendously popular TV show. So people love zombies. Of course, the question is, why? First, I think you can just watch it for pure pleasure. I don't think people watch, like, I'm going to learn something today by watching zombie movies. I think you just watch for pure pleasure. But I also think zombie movies could be categorized as cultural art. And art reflects the values and beliefs and thoughts of the culture that it arises from, the context of composition. And if that's true, then what is it in zombie movies that reflects our cultural values, reflects your cultural values? That's what I want us to think about a little bit. So to do that, I don't want to speak generally. I want to talk specifically. So I'm going to talk about 2 zombie movies to get you to think about this. The first one is the 1968 film Night of the Living Dead. It's a great movie. This is the foundation of the modern zombie. It premiered in October 1st, 1968 in Pittsburgh. It's a student film, actually, by its filmmaker, George Romero. And in that, a meteorite strikes the earth, and the undead rise from the grave, and a group of people hole up in a farmhouse. Now, instead of working together, they essentially rip each other apart. Young turns against old, family against singles, race, black against white, so much so that by the end there's only one survivor. It's also famous for having the first African-American actor, this guy Dwayne Jones, that ever has a lead role in any movie ever made. So already you can see the social criticism going on in this film just by Dwayne Jones. And in fact, at the end, as the credits roll, and he's the lone survivor of the night, as he is looking out the window, as he finds a group of people coming to seemingly save him, they end up mistaking him for a zombie and shoot him. And it's interestingly a group of white vigilante, basically mob, and the images that roll very much mimic lynchings and violence against African American males that are just going on in this American South in the 1960s. So it's very clear, very hard to miss this as you watch this film. But it's not just the survivors that are interested in this film and let us think about ourselves, but rather it's the zombies themselves. The vacant stare, the lumbering gait, the jaw wide open, help us think a little bit about who we are, or meant to help us think a little bit about who we are as people. In fact, Romero, if you look at this even closer, you can see how he clothed his zombies in blue-collar working gear and pajamas. What he is trying to do is to symbolize an entire group of people sleepwalking through the 1960s, which 1960s America, with Vietnam, civil rights, feminist movements, were a time of great heated exchange, social unrest, where there's a lot of issues to care about. And what Romero is saying here is that most people could care less. Rather, they're simply zombies. Now, there's a lot of zombie movies that happened after Romero from the period of 1968 to the next film I'm going to talk about. Particularly, one of my favorite ones is a movie called Zombie. Nicely titled, very creative title, by Lou Felcini, who's an Italian director. It's a pretty awesome scene, and my favorite zombie scene, in which a actor playing a zombie actually bites the fin of a live shark underwater, and to this day, no one really knows how they did this without the shark turning on them, but you check that out. It's pretty interesting. But probably the best one to talk about is actually Romero once again with his sequel, Dawn of the Dead. In this one, Romero has his survivors, instead of being in a farmhouse, they hole up in a mall. In this film, he's taking on consumerism. Late 1970s and then what's projecting into the 1980s, consumers rampant, capitalism, rampant consumerism. In it, the survivors are in a top floor of the mall, while the zombies themselves are in the bottom part of the mall, lumbering around and doing things zombies do. Instead of really working together to think about solving this problem, what the survivors do is they essentially kind of go nuts, like kids. In fact, they're playing video games and trying on fur coats and stuff like that. And as scene is put against scene, it's very hard to tell the difference between the zombie kind of going through and falling into the fountain of the mall, and then the survivor who is happy to be playing with money, which no longer has any value because the world has fallen apart with the zombie apocalypse. Romero's zombies, though, once again provide the interesting critique, the interesting metaphor for us to think about our lives. In it, these zombies show up at the mall. It's them breaking into the mall. And they lumber around the mall for no real discernible reason. Except one survivor puts forth an interesting proposition that they're here because this place, quote, was somewhere important for them in their lives. That they come here out of behavior. They don't go to their homes. They don't go to their religious establishments. They don't go to anywhere that you might think of something of importance. Instead, they go to the mall. Right? If that isn't a metaphor or a critique about society in your face that simply goes, I don't know what is. But to help us understand this a little bit more, I want to show you a scene. I want to take a moment to stop talking. I want to show you a little brief scene from Romero's Dawn of the Dead. And I want you to think about and especially pay attention to the characters' words, what they say at the end of the 2 minutes. And then it'll help us think a little bit more about how semiotics can help us see symbol. Oh, do we have the video? There it is.
What the hell is it? Looks like a shopping center. One of those big indoor malls.
Oh, my God.
No chance. Forget it. Let's get out of here.
Wait a minute, they can't get up here.
Yeah, and we can't go down there.
Let's check it out.
Most of the gates are down. I don't think they can get into the stores.
I haven't seen any of them up on the second floor.
Big department stores usually use both floors.
If we can get in up top. It's pretty lit up in there.
Guess the power's not off in this area. A lot of Philly's still lit. Could be nuclear.
What are they doing? Why did they come here?
Some kind of instinct, memory, what they used to do. This was an important place in their lives.
All right. So that line at the end, why do they come here? Instinct, important place of their lives. This movie begs us to ask the question, is that us? Are we a consumer like that? If we think about the important places of our lives, is the mall, or probably now today, let's say the online shopping market, is that something that defines who we are? You see, these questions are really great to ask, and semiotics helps us think about that. The metaphors around us to reflect on our lives. Most zombie movies today, they use technology to get at questioning who we are. So there's movies like Shaun of the Dead, Girl with All the Gifts. These kind of zombie movies, the characters are shown how technology essentially zombifies them. And if you don't think that's a real critique on culture today, I challenge you, go to a Starbucks and count how many eyes are not looking at a device. And every teacher will tell you the look of a student on their phone staring at it with a mouth ajar very much looks like a zombie. Zombie movies help us think about our lives. In fact, George Romero himself realized the value in this in 1978 when he said, maybe there's a little bit of zombie in all of us, eh? Zombie movies help us reflect on who we are as a person. But zombie movies in themselves, it's really not that academic a thing. Right? It's just something mundane. But it shows, semiotics helps you see how something so mundane as zombie movies can be a deep well of personal education and personal reflection. All it requires is a simple awareness. And in that comes to our third point. Awareness. That is how we are meant to live our lives. Awareness that every moment is pregnant with the possibility of learning and education. And in that way, the undead can really teach the living how to live. Thank you.